Should I definitely use this, or should I try and speak? Totally up to you. Can people hear me if I just talk?
I think you should use the mic just because people fade out as they go along, and it's hard to speak that loudly for a while.
Can we drop the shade here? That was just a minute.
There are no shades.
Okay, people, it's working? People hear me? Okay, that was a wonderful introduction. I've been able to skip some of my slides, I think. Thank you for that. And thanks to BSN. We've been hosted in their office over here down the block for a couple of 3 years now or so. We moved here from Gays Mills, where Rob originally had the office in his house. I know a lot of you are familiar faces. You probably knew Rob. Maybe you've already donated to community conservation. And how many people here knew Rob? Just a show of hands, maybe. Okay, great, yeah. So he has a large following here. Next slide. This is Rob, for those of you who didn't know him. He was part of the leaders who worked with communities and truly believed in the power of communities to conserve biodiversity. Next slide. He worked, not only all around the world, which is mainly what I'm going to be talking about tonight. I'm sorry, I'm standing right in front of you, aren't I? But he also played a role in founding so many organizations right here in Wisconsin, which is why I titled it Wisconsin to the World, right? He learned things here that he took to other countries. He learned things in other countries that he brought back here and shared. And I know some of you probably have stories about Rob's role in some of these organizations. I would love to hear them. I have heard, for example, that in the Sauk Prairie Recreation Area, he showed up and videotaped every single meeting, and there's a master's student at the UW now that is using those videotapes to recreate the history of how that collaboration came about. So I know he played a different role. He was always a catalyst for conservation. He loved to talk about catalyzing. And he participated in so many different ways here and in the projects all around the world. So as I said, he worked in more than 27 projects in 15 countries over that 30 years, which is a lot of projects. He would work in one for 2 or 3 years, get funding, help get something going, work with a local NGO, show them his method of communicating and collaborating with communities, and then move on to another project. So he did a huge amount of work around the world over that 30 years. Rob died 5 years ago, and so community conservation has been transitioning. I've been the director. I've been on the board since 2011. Joe Rising, who came on right after me on the board, is here tonight. So Joe can also answer any questions if you have them later or anything. And I became the executive director about 2 or 3 years ago as part of the transitions. Next slide, please. Tonight I'm going to try and just tell stories about some of my recent trips that I've been able to do since COVID ended, finally being able to get out in the field and go to these project sites and meet our partners. Most of them are project places where Rob had worked before, where we went back and are helping support the partners that he had there. And I have 5 sites on here. I'm actually not going to talk about Thailand. I decided I was trying to cram too much in. So we're not going to talk about Thailand tonight. We also have projects in Myanmar and Madagascar that I'm not going to touch on tonight, but just to let you know they're happening. Next slide. And then I was going to do a little intro, but we had such a nice one from Beth. This is me this is Peace Corps, and then my PhD was in Nepal on people's perceptions of protected areas, how people in Nepal valued them. So to me, people's perceptions, their sense of place, as Nan mentioned, how they feel about a place, has always been really important for me, understanding people's relationship with the environment, not just here, but in places like Nepal, and Myanmar, and all these other countries. What environmental values do they have is what initially drove me to become involved working with communities. Here I am working for USAID. I was based in Washington, D.C., got to do top-down huge projects, funding large biodiversity projects around the world. But I also had a chance to go back to Nepal, and I threw this in just because I love traveling with my son. So here he was when he was 8 months old. Next slide. And here he is at 22, and in Peru with me last month. He's been a communications intern for CC on 2 or 3 different trips, coming along as like a volunteer photographer for us. So a lot of the slides you'll see wildlife for him in this presentation. And Sam Shimi there is our partner in Peru that we were visiting with this time. And it's interesting too, because in Peru, I actually had a woman, she's early 30s, but still finishing up her bachelor's, volunteering for a partner there, doing some primary research. And immediately upon meeting me and meeting Emil, she said, oh, you make me think that I could have kids and still be a scientist.
Yeah.
And it was just amazing to me that, you know, I mean, he's 22, doesn't really, I don't know, I was sad that even in this day and age, women are having to make that choice, but also it's nice to see what those little things and how they impact people in their professional lives. Next slide. This is me being a consultant in India. This is after I worked for USAID, I continued to consult and do evaluations for them around the world on biodiversity projects. This is an evaluation I did in India on their big forestry project in 3 different states. So I wear a lot of hats. I'm the director of this, but I also do consulting, and I'm also still, next slide, an academic. I'm still affiliated with the UW and their forest wildlife ecology and Nelson Institute. So trying to keep a lot of things going, but they all come together around communities, right? So everything I do is still about communities and inserting the conversation about communities into conservation. Next slide. So I started working with CC back in 2011. Someone from the Smithsonian actually introduced Rob and I. So Rob, who lived in Gays Mills, I was in Maysville, but it took someone in Washington, D.C. to say, hey, you guys are near each other in small towns in Wisconsin. So in 2011, I started working with Rob on a paper from the project in Assam he was doing. He asked me to join the board, and here we are starting a project in Nepal in about 2012 together. Next slide. And I just want to mention, before I go into the different projects and try to tell the stories of the communities in those places, I just want to talk a little bit about what makes CC different. And you'll hear all the large NGOs, many conservation NGOs talking about community conservation, right? We sort of accept that communities are important. But I think CC and our partners, we do it a little different. And I think there's a lot of organizations like ours around the world that have found what our partner in Peru calls the secret recipe of truly working with communities. So we have a sticker there, and did I put some out? I have some stickers I should put out here that says a conservationist in every village. So we don't, so often with WWF and the TNC or some of the larger NGOs, you'll hear the language of, we have to convince people to conserve biodiversity. We have to show them the value. We have to provide them economic benefits or livelihood alternatives, and then they'll want to conserve biodiversity. The one thing, Rob and I are very different people. We have very different ideas and life experiences, but we did have that core understanding of just people and communities, no matter where they live, want to protect biodiversity. Not everybody to the same extent, but there's always somebody. Next slide, please. And this kind of goes along with the sheet that Nan gave you to fill out, asking, so my question to you is, why are you, most of you are probably somehow involved with conservation or interested in the environment, that's why you're here tonight. So what values do you hold towards the environment? Or what motivates you to want to conserve biodiversity, wildlife, plants? Can you just throw out some things that come to mind why you care about the environment? Survival? Okay. Anyone else?
Great nieces and great nephews.
Oh, for the future generations? Yep. Anyone else? Other? Beauty. Recreate, right? Aesthetics.
The interconnection of all beings.
Yeah. So the point.
Sustainability.
Yeah, thank you. Yep, all great, right? There's a diversity of values in a room. People will have different ideas about the importance of them. But there's a shared understanding that the environment is important. And all these answers you just gave me, in some way, shape, or form, you hear them in communities everywhere you go in the world. I've sat in so many villages, so many meetings, so many floors, and people say the same thing. Yeah, the tiger may come kill our livestock. We have a problem, but we don't want the tiger to go away. We want our children to see it, right? The future generations. Or we know if there's a healthy forest, we'll be healthier. And the forest can't be healthy without all the wildlife in it. We don't want, so we have the same recreation, even in developing countries where we think, oh, people are poor, how can they care? In Nepal, I heard over and over again, well, we like having the forest because it's cooler. We can take walks, it's green, it's beautiful, it's healthier. It's all the same set of values. So in community conservation, what we're trying to do is support the people in communities who already have those values and help them grow those values and support their community to take actions to protect their environment. Okay, next slide. So, the stories of the places, and hopefully the stories will kind of tell the story so that I don't have to do it myself. So, just in the, like I mentioned in January, I was in Peru visiting a partner. Next slide. And our partner there is a Neotropical Primate Conservation Group. Next slide. And this is Rob over here. They happen to have him up on their website for their different kinds of program activities that they do. So he visited them in about 2014. He met them at a primatology meeting, and they discovered, like I said, Sam Shani was sort of, like they had the same recipe as Rob in terms of they've been working primarily in one community, but they realized that to protect the woolly monkey that they were studying in the forest that it was living in, they had to really work with that community. And the community wanted to protect the diversity of wildlife and plants. They relied heavily on the plants for medicines. And so it's very easy to get the community on board, but they really were working in one area. And Rob said, hey, why don't we come, I'll come, we'll hold large meetings, we'll tell people you're here and that you want to work with them. So they had all these like government people come and NGO people and community people, and they just said, hey, we are here, we want to help you protect the forests around you and the wildlife around you. Contact us or tell people in the communities where you live to contact us if they're interested in working with us. And they got communities calling and saying, not only did they want to do it, but they already were doing it. But they didn't have land registered with the government. You know, they didn't have tenure. They were just doing it informally. And this started the last 10 years. NPC then has been supporting communities who come to them and ask for help to register the land in concessions. So every country, there's sort of a different policy context of how you can conserve, you know, habitat around their communities. And in Peru, they're called community concessions. And so they register the land as a community and then manage it. So that's what the NPC's been doing. Next slide. And they've done this in about over 10 communities now, spread around 2 different districts. And then we got to go to we've gone to 3 of the 4 new sites they're working on right now. This is Yontalo, so they're protecting, there's about 20 farmers that live around this side of this mountain, and they want to protect all that forest that you saw, which has, next slide, which has a San Martin titi monkey in it, which is critically endangered. So they're doing, this is my son got this video of the baby. This is, they're studying a couple of family groups. So there's 2 parents and the babies. And this couple has lost 2 babies already in the last just few months. The babies would disappear after a month or 2. So we think maybe they're like new parents that hadn't quite figured out how to keep the babies from falling or getting lost. So they're very careful with this one. They don't come down very low. It's hard to get a good view. Next slide. And this is one of the farmers. There's my son again and me. And this is one of the farmers. 2 farmers. I should say 2 farmers. I hate to say farmer and his wife, right? Farmer or husband. Who are helping. They're providing like almost a research station for the researchers for NPC. This is a lady who's doing research on the San Martin monkey. Next slide. And there's other species, of course, in there that are not necessarily critically endangered, but if, as NBC helps them register the land, they'll be able to protect other species. And other ones we got to see while we were there was the endemic Andean saddleback tamarin. Next slide. And we also saw the porcupine, the bicolored twine porcupine. So it's always nice to, you know, if you protect the forest, you protect a lot of different species. Next slide. Then we managed to go to a second site, Delta, which is about 8 hours. So it's this kind of forest up here on this hillside that they're trying to protect. And NPC actually helped them create an association and register this land about 10 years ago. But because of changes in policies, and they lost their original leadership, so they've asked NPC to help them re-register it with a new association. So again, policy changes. It's a never-ending process in a way, right? And with communities, it can be really hard for them to figure out, in a lot of countries, just the paperwork, right? To get something registered so they can protect it officially and not have, and all these sites in Peru, and it's the Amazon area, it's still sort of like the Wild West. If someone comes in and clears land, they can informally claim it as their own and no one else can really kick them off. So you need to have it registered as a community concession, and then you also have to work just to keep people from coming in. So it's a never-ending battle, sort of, in some ways. So they're going to help them re-register the site. But when we went, next slide. Oh yeah, so this is just showing how people are slashing and burning and coming into this concession even though it was registered 10 years ago. So they've constantly got to work and manage the area. Next slide. And so when we went and met with some of the association, people in the old association who want to re-register it, Nestor, who's actually, he's the in-country director over there on the far right of NPC, he was so excited because they said, not only do we want to, we need help re-registering this, but we have 2 new sites. We've been talking to 4 or 5 other communities, and there's 2 other patches of forest that we would like to create another association for to protect those also. And all these forests are around a fairly large urban area, so they're protecting different species of primates and everything else that goes along with that. Plus, they're a source of water. So many of these areas, as we all know, it's about water, right? It's about protecting water and having a healthy forest for your farming and your urban areas, just like here in Europa. And it's nice because if you're going to register 3 sites at once, you can send 1 person to help with paperwork and they can do it all at one time, right? So it's very efficient. So that's the kind of work we're supporting. Another example of what we're supporting in Peru. Next slide. And the 3rd site that we managed to go to is the Chimo waterfall, but they want to make a concession. And that association already has created a Ransom-Cache concession, which we couldn't get to because it was many hours drive away. We'd already spent 6 hours driving here, like multiple taxis. And you had to go another few hours drive and then walk for like 8 hours. It's a very remote forest, so we were not going to make it this trip. We didn't have that kind of time. But the waterfall was sort of up over here when the video first started, so it's in mountains kind of like that. Next slide. This is the association that is working on both concessions. Some of the members. And Juanita will tell you, the woman here is very active, and she tells the story of how they began Ransom-Cache concession by, there was a teacher in this community who knew, over 10, he's passed away now, but he was one who originally planted the seed of the idea because he saw the logging concessions coming in and taking over the forests. And he knew that communities could do the same thing, they could get their own concessions, but the people here didn't necessarily know that. So he spent a lot of time talking to them, like, you could get control of this land, you could conserve it. And this Ransom-Cache area was so remote that they had land around it, but they hadn't actually been into it. They were farming near it, even though they lived in this town, but they hadn't been inside. And she'll tell the story, and then Franklin at the other Sam here, and then Franklin also, they told the same story of, it was so hard to get there, we had to walk so far, but when we got there, we couldn't believe how big those trees were. We had never seen forests like that. They're like, where we lived with it, we don't cut things, right? It was all secondary growth, it was smaller trees because of our farming and our houses. And they just said the beauty of it overwhelmed them, and they knew they had to protect it. Because like Juanita says, we don't have that kind of forest around our farmland or around the city, right? This is precious. And so she spent her time getting a group going to support that teacher and getting the concession going, and then asking NPC for help again to write all the paperwork that has to get done to register. And you have to have a management plan, and those aren't things that a community can easily put together without help. And then the next slide, please. The waterfall area that I talked about, we want to make a concession, very near the town, and it's up here in these kinds of villages right up there in that valley. Next slide. And the municipality had already put in, it's got these beautiful hot springs and waterfalls, and the municipality had thought they could manage it as a tourism area, but then they gave up, they have too many other things, and now this concession would like to take it over and use it to protect the area near where they have the town where they live, but also possibly to make money. One of the problems in Peru is these concessions are pretty much closed off. You can't extract. Once a community gets it, they can't extract timber. They can't subtract. Some of the other areas where we work, that's how you make community forestry work, is the community extracts from it for their needs, right, while they protect it. But in Peru, you have to have a plan for making money. If you're going to lock it up as a concession, you somehow have to make money from tourism, or for like NPC, our partner, promising to help you for a number of years, manage it and protect it and things. So it's one of the limitations in Peru. So they're hoping to make this a concession, protect the area, and manage it well, and make money to help them keep all this conservation going. Next slide. Okay, we're going to move on to development. If I go too fast with any questions, I'm going through a lot of sort of stuff, so feel free to interrupt.
Well, how close to the Amazon are you there?
Yeah, so in that area in Peru, we're right on like the southwest edge of the Amazon. That's the Peruvian Amazon area. So we're kind of up into the hills. They're working sort of halfway over into this area and up to the Amazon area.
And it's mainly logging that's destroying the forest.
Yes.
They don't, and after they log it, they do anything with it.
I think people go in and farm, right? Like I said, it's the Wild West here. These migrants that are coming up. So that's the other main threat, is migrants just clearing it for farming.
What do they raise?
Oh boy, you're asking lots of questions.
Well, like,
Yeah,
for example,
I mean-
in Brazil, it's soybeans.
Yeah, no, here I think it's more rice.
Brazil.
It's, yeah, too hilly. I think it's more subsistence crops or crops that they're selling locally.
So how do you keep these intruders out?
Well, they have to do patrols, so that's part of the management. Once they get the management plans written and they get control of the concession, then you have to hire people or have volunteers who are patrolling. And it's a constant battle because you can't always get the police or anyone to support when you're doing that. When you have someone come in, you've got to negotiate with them, or you've got to maybe, so in every place in the world where we work, these boundary issues are hard, right? So it can be very difficult. But it takes a sort of constant management, people watching it and telling people, look, this land is not free and available. This is our boundary, this is community concession, right? And that constant sort of vigilant.
Is this like an armed patrol? I mean, how difficult is it to keep people out?
No, in most of these countries, you can't be armed, right? Like only the official national park guards could be armed, right? So people aren't armed here. Although we had to walk through some, unfortunately Peru is in turmoil again, right, with the election issue and the president and everything. So we were walking through roadblocks, and I noticed the first day when we were getting through roadblocks to get to some of these sites, I didn't see any weapons. And as the day we were leaving and going through the last of the roadblocks, everyone was carrying, billy clubs. So things were increasing, I guess, but still, you're not seeing guns.
Yeah, so my question is, I understand it's really pretty dangerous down there to be in any sort of environmentalist, conservationist kind of role, because
Yeah,
a lot of them are being,
Yeah.
I don't know about Peru in particular.
Yeah, I'm not sure either what the numbers are, but I think South America is the worst in terms of people getting killed than environmental activists. Right.
And I guess my other question, which may pertain to a lot of these areas, is it better from a perspective to be into ecotourism if you want to protect these areas, to be the tourist who goes there, or to be someone who just says, here you go, I want to support it, but with the knowledge I may never be able to go there?
And whichever one's better for you is the better one.
Well, I would say ecotourism, I'd love to see these places, but
Yeah.
I mean, we can't all go. I
Yeah.
guess that would just be very disruptive as well.
And not all the places can really support ecotourism, right?
That's right,
The
yeah.
infrastructure, yeah, the people, and so NPC will arrange for some of their more remote sites where there is no tourism, they're sort of set up to accommodate people, right? To take them there if they want to go and see it. They are trying, because that will help the community make some money and will help them sort of offset some of the costs. So they do try that, but it's not an official thing. You contact them, you say, I really want to go see the woolly monkey, can you take me to the site? And they don't get many people asking for that, so they can often accommodate it at this point, I think. But that's why I like the falls with the tourism site is so important, because it's close to a town. They could probably manage that and more easily make money, not damage the resource. It's not going to be complicated tourism like it can be in some areas. Anything else? Okay, next site, we're going to move over to Africa, to Cameroon. I managed to go there, next slide. I managed to go there last spring. And our partner there is called Community-Based Biosynergy Management. Not my favorite name. Hard to remember, but I think I have it down now. And our partner here, so this is the CBBM staff, and this is Dennis Ndelo, who originally started working with Rob back in, I think about 2014 also. They started a guerrilla project, which we had to shut down, and we haven't been able to work on because of civil conflict. A lot of sites where we work, civil conflict, there's always problems with so many places. Myanmar, I've worked there since 1999, but we've been pretty much shut down for the last couple of years, and our partner's getting out to do some things, but not very much. So I'm not talking about them tonight, but so Dennis he loves primates, he loves the gorilla, he was helping Rob with that project. And then the last trip Rob made actually, I think that caused his death ultimately. And so this was 2016, he went to Cameroon and he died 3 months after coming back. And Dennis told me the story of how he was really sick. They weren't sure he was going to make it out of the country. He wouldn't take malaria medication. And so it's pretty sad. But he he inspired Dennis. So Dennis has gone on to found his own organization out in Cameroon to work with communities, because Rob taught him communities. You know, if you want to conserve gorilla, you want to conserve anything, he convinced him you have to have communities involved. And he's like, Rob, we just kept pressing me, the community, the community, the community. And now Dennis is a total believer, which I think is how a lot of conservationists come into thinking about communities, is they want to conserve the biodiversity. They want to go do research and just understand the beauty of it all. And then at some point they realize, oh, this isn't really going to work unless we work with communities. And so there's a lot of what I call converts, right, to communities, as they realize that I want to save the species I'm interested in their habitat. I've got to involve the people that are living there and are the ones who can actually help protect it. So Dennis started this organization, next slide. And I went with him in the spring when he was holding sort of his first meeting for his NGO. He had some staff and he used a similar model that I learned from Rob. Have a big meeting. And Cameroon is a smaller country than Peru, so in Peru they just did it in a couple of districts with Rob. In Cameroon, he was able to do sort of the national level, invite government officials, key NGO people, and then actually a couple of local community leaders who came to the meeting, those are the two sites where he's working now. This is one of the community leaders, and this is another one, so we're going to visit their villages during our trip after this meeting. And again, it's just a meeting to say, hey, we are here and our goal is to help communities. We're not here to help a community make money from timber or livelihoods. We're here to help you do what you want to do. And that's where those two community leaders came from. They came to him and said, this is what we want help with. Next slide. So we went out and visited their sites. Oh, and this slide is just to remind me to say, one thing we're doing since, Rob touched so many groups in so many different places, but never really brought them together, right? We didn't have Zoom so much, even 5-10 years ago, right? The idea of Zooming between all these countries and continents. So for the past 2 years, we've been holding partner meetings where all these people I'm talking about have been coming together over Zoom. We're trying to form an identity in a community so we can really, impact the world a lot more than we are now with the isolated projects that Rob had worked on, right? Trying to bring all that together. And so in meetings like this, when I go, one thing I do is share lessons. So community forestry is the model in Cameroon for most of the community conservation, and it's the same in Nepal, very similar community forestry model in terms of the policy. So sharing lessons, right, across these countries and sites, and Nepal is very advanced. I'm going to talk about them a little bit more. So there's a lot to learn about successful community forestry from them. Okay, next slide. So here's the first site we went to called Sommier, which is up in the northwest, in a place where they don't think about doing community conservation. So this is the chief, and this is Dennis, and this is the forest where they have chimps. And they want to protect that area for chimpanzees because they said they're not coming as close to the village as they used to, and the forest is getting degraded, and we want to protect this area. Please come help us get tenure, get community, registered as a community forest. And this is an area in the northwest. They don't think of community forestry here because it's not the valuable hardwood tropical forest in this area. This is more of a dry plateau range. And so can Dennis manage to convince the government this is a good place for community forestry? He's at the beginning of this journey. Next slide. We have to figure out how many chimps there are. So here's 3 chimp nests that we found when we went on our trip. So we know there are chimps there. We didn't see any. Dennis just went back this month, so I have an update. He came back like last week. I don't think he saw any then either, but they know they're there. They're making nests and moving around. Next slide. But again, a lot of threats. So this is on the Nigerian border. So the Nigerians are coming through this porous border filled with trails through the forest, bringing oil and gasoline from Nigeria, because that produces a lot of it, and taking foodstuffs back because they're food deficit. So they come over on these little motorcycles and little trails. And then they also bring over their cattle. So they'll burn and graze their cattle, which must help the local people because they don't seem to be stopping them. And then they begin to farm, like a slash and burn form of farming. So there's something we don't quite understand there. So we were a little worried. Is it just the leader who wants to actually conserve the forest, or does the community? Next slide. So when Dennis went back this last month and had more time to spend with him, this is Dennis, this is the chief, this is his traditional roundhouse where they hold traditional meetings with the village elders. And he said he has never seen a community, once he had a chance to sit down with different members of the community, that is so committed to doing something. It's not just the village chief, but everyone seems truly committed to protecting the chimp and the environment. And next slide, just to show you some more people in the meeting. And even the women, so his staff had gone there in December to sort of work more with the community and talk to them. And when Dennis came back a couple weeks ago and met with them, the women after the December meeting had formed their own group to talk about what they wanted out of some kind of conservation project. And they already had a plan that they showed Dennis in terms of there's an existing nursery, they want to protect it, they want to put a fence around it, start a vegetable garden, and restore the forest in the degraded areas. So he's like, so I asked him, so if there's not enough chimps, is this area worth protecting? If this is an isolated population that's not connected to larger chimp population, and he's like, I don't know, we got to figure that out. That's the research side, we'll do that, we'll figure it out. But this community is so motivated, why wouldn't we help them? And a chimp is a chimp is a chimp, like a human is a human, right? So we want to protect these chimps even if in the long run it's not a viable population. So either way, he's like, we got to move forward. So next slide. And then just this, I'm not really talking about all the other activities associated with helping a community protect an area, but a lot of it is sharing information, sharing awareness. A lot of communities may want to conserve biodiversity, but they don't know the global context of what they have, right? So in Nepal, I had a woman ask me, "You don't have elephants in the U.S.?" Like, oh my God, she's like, "I like them, but they're common. Like, how could you not have them?" So just basic knowledge about all of us, right? Like, I think even, I was asking Joe if he knew what a biodiversity hotspot was that came up, right? There's so much to know. Right? And we can't all know everything. But they're hungry to learn. They're hungry to learn about the context of their biodiversity and what it means to other people. They know what it means to them, but they love to see other people talking about it, telling them about it, teaching them all the research that we know, right? They like to learn all that stuff too. So this is a community concert. This is a school activity that Dennis did where they had like a spider drawing contest. So the kids are practicing on their chalkboards and then they did it on paper in the end. Next slide. Because the spider is a culturally very important animal to them. So this is a museum in the nearest largest town, about 6 hours drive away. It's a historical museum about the tribal culture, and it's a spider. The next slide.
Are they poisonous spiders?
I don't even know if it's just one species or if it's just all spiders. I think it's all different types, but I don't, there's too much to know in the world, right? I wish I knew more about it. So here's the second site in Cameroon. This is the Baka community. You might have heard of Baka pygmies. Their music is quite famous. There's been a lot of National Geographic articles and things like that about them. This is the chief showing us on the ground, sort of the border of the community forest area. This is a community forest that already exists. Down in the southeast, it's where the valuable hardwood timber is. And so the government created community forestry to help these communities get income from the timber. So it wasn't just all going to the timber companies, right? So they think of community forestry as being about making money from timber. Not that the local communities, the Baka, don't view it that way. They don't want to lose their timber. They want it for conservation. So what he's telling us here is he's explaining to us, when we got our community forest, we thought we could go back to our traditional ways of living, which meant we could hunt like we've always traditionally hunted. And then they realized they couldn't because the land, there isn't as much forest, right? So they're not sustainably hunting, they're seeing the wildlife disappear, and they want help learning how to sustainably manage. So here they already have a management plan, they have tenure, but they need help coming up, doing the research and figuring out how do we sustainably hunt. Next slide. And this is right around a protected area. Here's some of that timber I was talking about. And to the Baka, what they told me was, honey, bees, and honey, and then hunting. That's how we survive in the forest. I mean, they rely on many, many things from the forest, but those are two primary things that they rely on. And as these big trees get taken down, they lose their bees. Next slide. So one thing we saw in this particular village was the local pastor, because there's a lot of missionaries, and they're supported by a group in Alabama, actually. There's a pastor in the health clinic there. But this pastor is basically a scientist. So he's been trying to domesticate or figure out how to make hives for the 14 species of endemic bees that they rely on there. Because as the trees get cut down, they lose the bees. He's like, well, we can maybe make hives. So he's successfully gotten one species of bee to make a hive in one of the boxes he built. So there's still 15 to go. But these are the kind of people you meet out there. And then he was actually keeping a list of every species of plant that he's not Baka, right? As the pastor, he came in from outside. He's lived there for 20 years and he's documenting all this indigenous knowledge and helping them learn about the medicinal plants. So next slide, please. It's pretty amazing. So what Dennis has done is with this community, and then about, I think think he's up to 12 communities now, there's 10 here. He's gotten them as a first stage of understanding wildlife in their areas to nominate 2 people who are regularly hunters or people who go to the forest to help them start to monitor the wildlife. So he'll have 20, 24 people learning how to monitor in a smartphone, take notes, what tracks they see, what animals they see, what kind of threats or poaching or cutting of timber, right? To help monitor this whole area around the Jaw Funnel Reserve. So right, sort of the buffer area, the protected, buffer zone of the protected area. So it's the beginning stages of building trust and seeing how committed they are, right? We're not sure, it's a new site. Who knows how committed people are and how far they want to take it, but in the initial stages of building that trust. Next slide. Okay, any questions about Cameroon? Okay, we're going to move on to Nepal, my first love, since I was Peace Corps there and I continue to work there. Next slide. I mentioned that Nepal is an amazing place for community forestry and for wildlife. And Rob actually, one of the reasons here's Rob, because back in 2012 when we did the first training on tiger monitoring. So the issue in Nepal is that the communities are really involved in community forestry. Next slide. It's all over the country. Communities protect 1/3 of Nepal's forest, another third is in protected areas, and another third is government forest. And between the New York Times has covered this very recently, between the 1980s, and there's lots of articles on this, but between the 1980s and now, Nepal's forest cover has gone from 26% to 46%. And that's primarily because of community forestry, which is amazing, right? So this is a global model for us. Next slide. But they haven't connected it to wildlife, right? So you have communities helping to protect wildlife around protected areas, but people still think, oh, wildlife, protected areas. Community forests, extraction of non-timber forest products, and some timber, right? That's for livelihood things. So we're trying to bring community forestry, wildlife conservation into community forestry across, so right now, this section of Nepal, and this stems from, so when when Rob first came with me and started working there around protected areas, he realized, wait, you can't, this is harder on protected areas, because at that time the government really didn't want communities camera trapping around the protected areas or knowing where tiger actually were because of poaching issues. So it was a hard thing to get going. But Rob realized, wait a minute, what I really want to do is I want to link, so this area from here, this is kind of a forgotten area in Nepal. High density of population, a lot of agriculture. People sort of think the forests are a lost cause. But if you could link, and then you start getting into the hills, right? And this is where tigers and elephants are. Well, there aren't tigers yet, but elephants are still here. So if we could link the forest here through community forestry and conservation of wildlife, you could have a corridor going all the way to, this is Manas Biosphere Reserve over here, which is probably where Rob's second most famous project was for the golden langur monkey. So Rob had this vision of this huge corridor, so it is a long-term vision. And he actually, because of his model of sort of working at one site and looking for grants, because you could get sort of initial funding from a donor, but then you need grants to continue it, and he couldn't get grant money, so we dropped it. And then next slide, but when I came back in, I said, hey, let's start this up again. Let's make a long-term commitment because this is such an amazing project idea. And we've started camera trapping, and this is the kind of video we've been able to put together. And so we camera trap with communities, and we've done 28 community forests in 2 of the districts now, and there's about 10 districts we need to cover. But we show them what wildlife they have in their forest, and they don't know, right? A lot of these species you're not going to see, right? Unless you have a camera trap. So we're trying to get them interested in camera trapping. They could buy their own camera traps. They make money off their community forests and start to monitor the wildlife themselves. And again, initial stages, we're trying to see how it's going. But the same idea that Rob had, like you bring lots of people together and say, this is what we could do. Do you want to do this? Next.
Was that first thing an armadillo?
Pangolin.
Pangolin.
Yeah, pangolin. Which is one of the most highly traded species in the world. So it's very threatened because of that. So there's a lot of work in Nepal going on for pangolin in a lot of places in the world. Africa too, there's pangolin in Africa. Next slide. And this is us showing the communities. And so, there's these great scenes where the community, they see a certain species and they all get excited, and I've never managed to catch one in my video, but but they love watching them, and they'll sit there saying what the species are as they see them. So it's always an interesting thing. Next slide. So that was 8. Let's see, did I cover everything about Nepal? So Nepal, no, so Nepal is amazing not just for community forestry, but as I said, the wildlife conservation around protected areas has been amazing. They are one of the few countries that doubled tigers. You know, WWF had a big push to double tigers by 2022, and they're one of the few countries that managed to do it. They've also had they've restored their rhino population to they have over 500 rhinos. They have too many, they don't know what to do with them. They translocate them different places. So they're an unbelievable success story in that way. And then I was going to do Thailand, but I've left it off, which looks like it's good, which is a good idea. And we're going to go down to Malaysia, which I actually visited pre-COVID. It was one of the only trips, the last trip I got in before COVID hit. Next slide. And this is actually I went more as a technical advisor to a student I had at UW who was collaborating with the Smithsonian on a long-term project, camera trapping around Luz, the Lanjak International Wildlife Sanctuary. And you have to get there through taking boats up to longhouses. Next slide. So she wanted me to come up and help her figure out how to transform her project, which was just camera trapping in a protected area, but paying local community members to learn how to camera trap and assist, to be like the research assistants. But there was no community-led, no community-driven. It was all about just hiring people to come help in the protected area. And she became really interested in community conservation and said, hey, would you come and help me figure out how I could continue my project, but with the community? Figure out what they want to do and if they want to work on it and where they want to go. Next slide. That's a bird that protects the orangutan in this area. So again, when we went back during my trip, I said, well, why don't you show them what you've learned? Show the whole community, right? Not just the guys who helped you camera trap. We've seen the camera trap footage. But show everyone. So here we are sitting in the longhouse. This is the indoor porch. Each door is a separate nuclear household. They all live together, about 20 households all in a row like that in one big building. In modern cement type buildings nowadays. And they were very excited about what they saw. Next slide. And then we also, Olivia's like, I want to involve the women. And I could have given a whole hour's talk just about gender. I do a lot of work on gender, which is also a really interesting thing to talk about at each of these sites. In this case, Olivia said, I'd like to involve the women, but I don't know how. And I was like, well, have you asked them? Have you asked them if they want to be involved? Have you asked them, for example, if they want to learn how to camera trap? So we asked them, they're like, yeah, why didn't you ask us 2 years ago? We would have loved to learn. Like, we don't know why you're only showing the men. And so we did an impromptu camera trap training over a couple of days with them. And it's interesting because, we talked about different motivations. And, I don't want to make it sound like, oh, everyone's protecting biodiversity just because of their love of nature and wildlife and sense of place and future generations. I mean, another reason that women do it is because they're like, yeah, because the men got to rotate and get paid, and if her husband wasn't here, he was over in the city that day, and he missed the rotation, we lost the money. If we knew how to camera trap, we could have replaced it and gotten that income, right? So there's multiple reasons to be doing any activity. So the women were excited, they were honestly excited to be in the training, but it also meant there's an opportunity for them, right? If they learned a new skill and learned new knowledge, they could, and there's a nice outcome, next slide. This just shows the camera trapping again. So again, this is a project that sort of, Olivia lost her fund, COVID hit, she had to give up funding, she had to go and try and develop this for the community. We have the Sarawak Forest Corporation as our in-country partner. They're not that interested in communities, but the staff person who is Olivia's main collaborator really wants to keep it going. Maybe go there. Next slide. Oh, sorry, okay, you can go back to the video. So she went back, so Olivia also, and then Rose. So Rose is the woman who's our in-country partner, and she actually, it looks like, may come to the UW next year for a professional master's program that we got her into, and so she wants to come and create, I hope in the end she's going to want to start her NGO. Right? And she's going to want to do community conservation work because in Malaysia there's not much there's a lot going on, but the policies aren't very supportive of communities. So there's a lot of talk of indigenous peoples. They've drawn boundaries for all these longhouses. They all have their maps, and you say, well, what's this boundary for? And they're like, well, we don't agree with it because the government came and did it by asking us questions, but we don't know why they drew the lines where they did, and we don't know what it means to us. It's not like it gives them any kind of control or management over the area. So it's a very policy-wise, a very hard place to figure out how to work with communities. So So Rose, who's hopefully going to come here and do a master's, went back to that community last year as a follow-up. So like I said, Olivia couldn't go and she doesn't have funding. And Rose was like, we're going to keep this going. And based on the class she took from me, she tried a process of appreciative inquiry, which is where you take a very positive approach to say, not like, what are the threats to your biodiversity? And what are the problems? And we're going to help you fix them. But where do you guys want, where do you want to see your community in 5 or 10 years? What do you want the biodiversity and the environment and the forest around your longhouse to look like? And there are 3 different groups that end up working together, men, women, and younger people. And they all had something different. The men wanted to learn how to actually monitor the orangutan themselves because they've been getting hired by Wildlife Conservation Society as like guides to walk them through the forest every year or 2 to do the monitoring, the surveying for orangutan in the area. And we want to learn how to do that ourselves. We want to learn ourselves how to track data and keep track of the population of orangutan. And then the women said, we notice hornbills aren't coming as close. We've lost the kind of trees around the hornbills want to live in. We want to plant trees for hornbills because those are trees that are important to us too. And the youth said, well, there's new bridges going in from the government because, instead of taking those boats, which is so hard now, there'll be bridges. So we want to get more tourists up here because they can go fishing, see the wildlife. So they're hoping to do some like rafting and that kind of like water tourism or something. So Rose was so excited about this. And luckily, actually I just got a text this morning from Olivia. She went back this last week to try and follow up. Smithsonian is interested in working, so a team went back. They followed up with the community, and now they have all these ideas after talking to them of how they could restore the rubber trees that have been planted, right? Because under rubber, there's like nothing. And so now they want to replace the rubber trees with some agroforestry, native species that are helpful to them, helpful to the hornbill. And this is an example I just want to point out because sometimes there's a lot of technical knowledge that communities just don't have, right? They know they want to do something. They know they want a healthier forest. But what's the best way to get there? And it's not like scientists always have the best answers, but they have some new ideas, right? And they know how to get some resources, like some species in the nursery or different ways to collaborate. So it's just another important element of working with communities is sort of meeting their need for information, helping them brainstorm, help them figure out what is going on in this other site that you could learn and bring here, exchange visits or whatever. So there's just so much to do with communities. Next slide.
What pray tale is a hornbill?
Sorry?
What pray tale is a hornbill?
It is a bird. It has a very large bill that looks like a horn. There are a lot of species of them. They're worth looking up. They're pretty amazing. So I just want to talk, these are some of the sites I was able to visit in the last year, really get to know the projects and the partners and see what everyone's doing since I've become the director. And like I said, so in terms of our future vision, where are we headed? Well, we want to continue directly supporting communities like this, right? Because that's the core. And we have all these amazing partners. We all share the same recipe, as Sam said. We really want to support these communities. So we want to continue doing that. Next slide. But we also are creating this partner network, like here's the Zoom that we do, trying to share lessons learned, trying to support the partner in country to spread their message of how to do community conservation, to support other people to be doing it, and also just across the globe, right? And it is a hard message because everyone says they're doing community conservation, right? So figuring out how you pitch the fact that we've got to build on the values they already have. We don't need to change people's values or convince them. We just need to be collaborating and working together. Like probably happens, we just take for granted a little bit more here in the US, right? That people hear, oh, they have enough income, they can care about biodiversity, they have those values. A lot of times we don't believe that those values exist in a country that we think of as very, very poor, even though they do. So trying to get people to change their thinking about communities. Next slide a little bit. And we're also building capacity for community conservation through online courses and workshops in person. So like I mentioned, the online courses we were doing, trying to build the capacity of all of our partner staff around the world and people that they know who want to learn more about it. And then I did an in-country workshop in Nepal this last year. So the potential again for our network to sort of build and expand the idea of what community conservation can be around the world is endless. So we're very excited about future activities and really building this network and this capacity. So there's a number of ways you can participate. One issue we face is because we work internationally. And like I said, Rob lived here, he went to all these meetings, but now we're getting more spread out. I'm over in Maizomeni. I've been there for 20 years, but it's still a bit of a drive to come here. And I traveled like for 6 months last year. So figuring out your niche when you're working primarily internationally, but there's still many ways that people can support and participate in what we're doing. So we have sign-up sheets here. You can go online, sign up for our updates. We're happy to share information, add you to our lists. Next slide. We are always looking for a board of directors. So if you're interested at all, or you know someone who might be, I think what we do offer is an international angle, right? Which is different than almost, except for like International Crane Foundation. There's not that much international work going on right here out of Wisconsin, right? Next slide. We're also trying to plan a donor trip to Belize, so I'm going to be visiting there for the first time in March, and we hope in 2024 to offer a donor trip. Many people who donate to CC met Rob in Belize, or probably if you live here, you've heard a lot about the project. We still have a poster and a book from that project. It started in the 80s, it's still ongoing, has this amazing history of going from the male-centered project to now it's female-run. The man's wife who first started with Rob, she now runs it in the last 20 years. So anyway, so it's a long history, so I want to go down and see it, and hopefully we'll have donors who want to come and see where the project is now and learn more about beauty conservation around the world. So if you're interested, please let us know. We also have an annual event that that you can participate in an auction in July. Next slide. And just to make a pitch for Ron Byers, there's an open mic night in honor of Rob every year in August. He's done it for a couple of years now at Rob's Art Garden, which is, I don't know if it's over at the bookstore, right? So every one night in August they get together and have an open mic and people read their poetry and things. So that's a nice night for everyone to get together and remember Rob. I just want to thank some of our sponsors. I'm always happy to have anyone sponsoring us, and Cameroon and Wonder Street are right here. The food co-op and Wonder Street are right here. The rest of all the local businesses in the Driftless area. We do have that in common. I may be over in Mesa, but we're part of this corridor now, right? That's getting developed. Next slide. And I just want to thank all of you for listening tonight. I'm happy to get feedback. This is my first in-person CC talk, right, as director post-COVID. So I'm really happy it's here in Baroqua, in the area where this was all born and so many people know Rob. So thank you for listening tonight, and to this community for supporting CC over so many years, right? Without this area, we would not be where we're at today. So we appreciate that, and we hope you will continue to support us and learn more about us. And then also just to point out, your support, the support from here and to Rob, really spreads the lessons of conservation from Wisconsin to everywhere and vice versa, right? So, I know I've been talking to like Shelley Brenneman at BSN, and hopefully now with you guys, about how can we sort of communicate more between all these projects we have out there, which are so similar to projects here, but we don't often bring a community in the fall and think about how did they do conservation, and think about, well, how is that similar to how we do it, right? And there's so many interesting lessons and parallels that we could be sharing, I hope. And then also just find out Coon Valley. Some people say it was the first community conservation project in the U.S., right? I guess there's arguments for and against that, but it is an amazing example that came right out of this area from the 1930s, right?
Is that when all the Leopold started?
Yeah, exactly. With those, I forgot the number, how many farmers now participated in soil erosion? And all came together voluntarily. So we have a long history here, and we're trying to take that history and trying to share it around the world. So thanks to all of you for being a part of that and for coming tonight. Joe and I are here, so we're happy to answer any questions. Please sign up. Yeah.
I have a question. Back in, I'm going to say 1993, Rob and I went with a delegation that he had worked scientists in Belize. We went to Tullum, our sister city, to set up some kind of collaboration between Tullum and community conservation
in
Russia.
Russia.
Mausoleum. And it was that's the homeland of the cranes. We involved, we got a USAID grant through, applying through the crane. And I'm wondering, is there anything in his record, is there any data that's left over other than me in my mind?
I don't know, most of the hard copy he had, he was a copious collector of his notes.
Yep.
So we had 20, 30, so a lot of hard copy stuff is gone. I still have all of his, external memory what's the word? You know, computer, all of his computer data and stuff. So it's possible there's something in there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know much about the Russia project. You're the main one who's told me about
Yeah,
it.
I got him to join the Varroa Friendship Association. If he joined, I said I'd make him the president of the committee, which we didn't have, but he became president. But anyway,
So he was always happy to participate and catalyze.
and we went to Russia, and it was a really great experience, but there were a couple of impediments along the way, and I just never heard, and I just never asked Rob, you know, and now I'm thinking, what happened?
Yeah.
I don't want to go over there right now.
Yeah.
But, you know, I'd like to know what happened.
Try and see if I can find anything. But you reminded me of a point that, I mean, one thing I'm trying to do now, we're building this partner network, but another huge piece of this is being able to commit to those partners in this network and not skip around because we can't get a grant, right? I'm trying to build a sustainable base of donors who are, you know, we have enough funding to make a commitment to a community that we're going to be here now and we're going to be here when you need help, for as long as you need help to get this project actually going and off the ground and make it sustainable. So Rob would stay with the project if he could until he thought it was sustainable. But like if you couldn't get a grant, you didn't have money, you've got to say, sorry, I can't do it. And I'm trying to avoid that. I'm trying to say, no, let's make a commitment to these partners who are doing this amazing work and not sort of skip around site to site. Right? Let's build a network. So that we'll always know what's happening somewhere, right?
I'd like to know his conclusions or
Yeah.
paper or any type of thing.
And I'll look. He may have written something up, so I'll look for you. Yeah. Any other questions or comments?
Who's your primary funding company?
Right now it's from our donors. Yeah, we do get grants once in a while. The last couple of years as part of this transition, we really look to donors to try and make us sustainable, to have a core. Because, you know, a grant will come and go. Foundation money will come and go, right? So yeah, you can hire people for 3 years and then you gotta let them go. So I'm trying to get us to a sustainable point, a certain level of commitment with our staff and our partners, and then start filling in, you know, extra with the grants, especially when you can afford. Grant writing takes up a lot of time, and you get maybe 5% or something, especially internationally with community stuff. There's very small grants, and they come and go within a year, right? Not even, you don't even get the 3 to 5 year funding a lot of the time. So it's just not sustainable, you know, when you're trying to work at a community level. It doesn't take much money, right? We can support some of the smaller projects, like in Malaysia, where it's just 1 or 2 longhouses. We can do, you know, a year's worth of a project on maybe $3,000 to $5,000. You know, it's not full time for anybody, but it's supporting it to keep going if they're already doing other things. And then some of the larger sites will be, you know, 15 to 20,000 at a time to commit. So that's kind of just to give you an idea of the scale that it takes to keep these going. At that level, I mean, more money we could do a lot more at a site, but with that much, because a lot of it is just paying for staff. Is knowing that you're going to have salary for your staff not coming from a grant, so they can go out this year and work with those communities, and they can go out next year, right? Because they know they have just the staff's salary to get out there. Because the grants, people like in Peru, Sam, our partner in Peru, will say, I get money for new sites. Their donors are like, yes, start a new site, go out here. But if I say I need some continued support to rewrite a management plan or to build the technical capacity of a community that already has a site, they're like, no, that's not new and exciting. That's already been protected, right? Even though it's not really at that point. And so trying to provide that core support so they can really keep functioning and pay people to go on the field and just talk to them. A lot of what you do in community stuff is just talk to people, have meetings, right? It's not very glamorous, and it can be hard to find people who like to do that. Everyone wants to go study monkeys. They don't want to sit down with another community and work through another, conversation and write more paperwork. So it's fulfilling, but it's not easy.
So did you have to learn new languages, and when you connect people from all over the place, does everyone speak English?
Nowadays, increasingly, yes. So even when I went to Peru, I took Spanish in high school. I thought, oh, I better brush up on my Spanish, because I've heard in South America, they really like their Spanish, right? They don't. And I got there and they were like, well, at least the colleagues, right, in the NGO, they were like, no, we want to practice our English. Like, we don't speak English with us, because we want to go to professional meetings, we want to, so I didn't need my Spanish. But I have learned Nepali. I speak Nepali fluently since I was peaceable and I worked there for so long. I've learned some Chinese because I worked in China for the UW for about 6 years. I took Burmese because I worked in Burma since 1999. I haven't gotten to stay there longer than a few weeks at a time. so pretty, limited. But got to use it in Thailand this last trip because we're on the border with Burma, and a lot of the Karen refugees come over there, so I got to use my Burmese there a little bit. And I took Swahili back in college, but I never got to use it. So even though I've been to East Africa for USAID, I never had to use it. But yeah, and just the English is everywhere. Everyone wants to learn English. Everyone wants the kids to learn it. So you're doing more of a service if you go out and practice your English with people. Okay. Anything else for anyone?
How large of a staff do you have?
Right now, we have me part about half-time, and we have a development person who's helping about half-time. And then we had a social media person who was doing a full-time master's program. So if you know any communications or social media type people who are looking for a job, we'd love to stay as local as we can and hire people from here. We had a bookkeeper here, and we have our office here, and then we need a new bookkeeper, and there are no bookkeepers in Baroka. So I got one from Mazomanie. so we're trying to stay as local as we can, but there's a lot going on here, right? And a lot of need for people like that. So if you ever have ideas for people who might want to work for us, let me know. Yeah.
Could you give an example of a new insight that came out of these different isolated projects coming together through Zoom and communicating with one another? You mentioned Nepal having some ideas of conservation, but have you seen some of the grassroots communication that's been fostered that you've been helping to put together?
Yes, but it takes time, right? And that's the other hard part of these groups or communities, right? You're meeting once a month on Zoom for an hour and a half. People have to get to know each other. They're not actually with each other. So building that sense of community, and I think after almost a year and a half of meeting now, we're getting to that point. So the themes are starting to bubble up. Like now we realize how many people are camera trapping with communities or have camera trapped, and looking at the different models, right? How do you compensate people for camera trapping without actually paying them so that when the payment goes away they don't do it? So we're starting to really, and software. What is the software out there that you can use with the community to do sort of the data collection, right? So many smartphones, so many different kinds of open source software. What's the best software, right? So we're starting to kind of coalesce around those kinds of things and bring in other groups to help us. Like there's a group called Ecologists Without Borders, who's a group of professional ecologists who just want to volunteer and go help. So we're starting to talk with them about how they can work on our different project sites. And so I think there probably have been some interesting insights that have been shared, but we're still pretty young. So we talk about publishing a paper about some kind of lessons learned about figuring out what those insights are. And I think we're still working on it to some extent. And it'd be great to bring people together at some point, right? Because I know it's not good for climate change to travel, but huge difference in the relationship.
That's all.
Yeah, so maybe we never will all see each other, but yeah. And I think also, I don't want to underestimate, people keep coming to these meetings on Saturday. For some of them it's like Saturday at 7 a.m. in Belize, and for some it's like 9 p.m. on a Saturday in Malaysia. And they keep coming, like it's a Saturday, it should be a day off, and they keep participating. And I think just the sense of sharing too, what you feel so isolated as an NGO, as like BSN probably knows, right? Sometimes you feel sort of, well, maybe in Morocco you don't feel very alone, but sometimes you can feel pretty alone, right? As an NGO working, trying to accomplish what you're trying to accomplish in your own little geographical area. And so sharing across these countries, I think, right? For a partner in Peru to say, oh, I was talking to my colleague in Malaysia and she's dealing with the same issue. I think that's starting to happen a lot. And that's really motivating and really helps the community.
That's being that catalyst that you mentioned.
Yes, a catalyst, catalyzing. So Rob loved the words catalyst and contagion, which we didn't talk about community contagion. But that is, like I mentioned, when we went to that one place, Delta in Peru, there was one community who had the association and they said, we have 4 or 5 other communities that want to work with this town. So we actually have our partner in Peru published a paper looking at that idea of conservation contagion, where communities will start wanting to participate when they see one community conserving and doing such an amazing thing. They're like, oh, can we participate? Can we do that? And so yeah, catalyzed and contagion. Sorry, someone had something else?
Yeah.
Oh yes.
You mentioned climate change just before when you travel many places. spoken to a lot of people. Does that come up very often in the communities worldwide?
Yeah, it does. And I
They're
think,
concerned?
yes. And I think for a lot of people, climate change is sort of something they learn. They learn from the media or from projects. But so before they kind of learn to call it climate change, they just talk about a lot of changes, right? Weather's changing, crop times are changing, so they see the changes, and then they sort of learn, again, outside knowledge comes in and says, this is climate change, we're all experiencing this, you're not alone. So everywhere we go, we see it. So both Nepal and, so in Nepal, the monsoons have been going later, so you have to start your camera trapping later. No one can get out in the forest to do anything until later in the year. I mean, not to mention what it does to their crops and their survival, their food security, right? I'm just talking about how it just impacts our projects day to day. And then in Thailand, we went out in December, and the monsoon went a month late, and there's no way we should have been out there. I actually had a video that might be on somewhere. We were winching our trucks out of mud this deep, like 30 times a day. It was ridiculous. No one should have been on those roads, but we had a plan. We had come from the U.S. We had to get out to those villages and talk to them. So so climate change is everywhere. In those monsoon countries, it's really noticeable, right? Because monsoons are starting later and going later, or not. The rains aren't coming at all for long periods of time. So it's pretty extreme in a lot of places. Last year, Nepal lost half their rice when the monsoon being messed up. So, anything else? Well, thank you guys. I can stay around for a few minutes.